have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
Hi, and I'm Gabe Gonzalez, filling in for Ann Northrup today.
Okay, and in the news this week, in a setback for the Justice Department, but a big win for justice, another federal appeals court has said that anti-gay discrimination is sex discrimination, and it's illegal.
Hopefully we won't have to revisit that story again in the Supreme Court. We'll see. The new face of student activism fighting gun violence is a bisexual student from Parkland, Florida, who is the president of her Gay Straight Alliance. We'll get to know Emma Gonzalez, a student at Parkland, student in Parkland, who is fighting for gun control with the rest of her classmates.
Mr. Trump was rebuked. The military has its first out transgender enlistee. There have been people who were in there who were allowed to come out. Now you can enlist if you want to be in our military.
The White House has ordered the State Department to cut back on reports of human rights violations for foreign countries. So we'll look into that, how that affects the LGBTQ community, particularly women and HIV/AIDS patients abroad.
In Starkville, Mississippi, we told you that the city council wouldn't give a permit to the Pride March, so they're getting sued, and the city will lose.
We'll be talking more about anti-LGBT rights bills around the country. Today we'll focus on Georgia, which is working on becoming more like Mississippi, advancing an anti-LGBT bill and threatening Delta Airlines, their largest private employer, for taking a stand against the NRA.
In Las Vegas, terrible story, a transgender bar was shot up and 2 people were injured.
And finally, we're going to follow up on the plight of LGBTQ people in Puerto Rico, especially how they're recovering after Hurricane Maria, what they need, what's at stake for their community in Puerto Rico, and how folks are recovering.
Now, you've met Gabe Gonzalez before. He was a guest a couple of weeks ago to talk about the DACA issue. But as we get started, tell us a little bit more about yourself. And we have a picture of you in action.
Oh, gosh.
Do you have that? Let's put that. Yeah, what are you doing there?
That's a storytelling event I was doing a few weeks ago. You know, at night I like to moonlight as a comedian and a storyteller. So yeah, you all caught me in action there. I was actually telling a story about my first job in New York, which was video editing, actually, for a very racy company that did some adult content forever ago.
Well, that's the roots of the show. We were started by Lou Maletta, who ran. Why don't I just say it? He was a pornographer, and he had all this equipment, this video equipment, and he said, "I want to cover the news as well," and that's how this all got started.
Hey, you go back far enough, and you'll find most video journalists, even Oscar-winning directors, have at some point, done some freelance work on the side for some adult film companies. But
but you're also a journalist.
I am, yeah. So most recently I was working at Mike. I left as a correspondent there a few months ago. I've been freelancing since, writing for a few publications, doing stand-up at night. Comedy is a passion of mine. So.
You have to tell us when you're appearing, and we'll put it in our newsletter.
Absolutely,
that goes out to you every week. If you'd like to be on our email list, go to gayusatv.org. On the homepage, you can check that out, and you can sign up for that and get a weekly preview of what's going on and some extras, like what's going on with Gabe. So we start with this big court decision from New York, from the Second Circuit. We've been, for a long time, we've been trying to get the courts to agree that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is sex discrimination, and therefore it's illegal under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So now it would be great if we added sexual orientation and gender identity into these laws explicitly. But the courts are saying, wait a minute, if you're discriminated against because you're gay, it's basically because of your sex or the sex of the partner that you choose or that you're attracted to, and that's so. We have the case of Daniel Zarda. He was a skydiving instructor at a place called Altitude Express on Long Island. We do have a picture of him in a pink hat, which is relevant to the story. And he was, so when you do, we've both done this tandem jumping.
We have both been skydiving before, yes, yeah.
And it's a very intimate act.
It is indeed. You're strapped onto another human.
And he was tethered, tell his story first rather than our stories, but so he's tethered to this woman, and to put her at ease, he said, don't worry, I'm 100% gay. And apparently his boss took umbrage to this, and his boss fired him. And he taped it. And I even have the quote of what the boss said.
Oh, this is an interesting,
He said he was fired for disclosure of personal information and also tension over his pink clothing.
Sure. Really? The color of the clothing?
Oh, God.
Oh, man.
So that's what happened. Now, the thing is, and her boyfriend complained about him, about the comment. And so he sued. And he sued in federal court. Now, New York State has a gay rights law, so he could have done that as well. So a lower court, a 3-judge panel said, no, the tradition here is no, the statute just says sex. This isn't sex, this is sexual orientation. But so it went up to this full, they call it en banc, all the judges of the circuit, and they 10-3 said that it was sex discrimination. The Obama administration had been on our side. The Trump administration argued against us.
Yeah, what's wild is this case was actually filed back in 2010. Mr. Zarda has since passed away.
Yes.
And we've seen so many changes in the federal court system, in federal policy, in terms of interpreting the Civil Rights Act from 1964 that it's wild to think that Mr. Zarda didn't see the conclusion to this case, but that the Justice Department is willfully undermining the way we have interpreted the Civil Rights Act of 1964 for years, and saying that sex doesn't cover LGBTQ people.
It took a long time to bring the Obama administration around on that as well.
Of course, it definitely did, yeah.
But his EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, did, starting with transgender people, right? And that's somehow been easier for the courts to accept that that's sex discrimination. And now on sexual orientation. So this is now the second decision like this. There's another one out of the 7th Circuit in Illinois where we won. We lost one in the 11th
Georgia,
Circuit.
Right?
Is that it? Yeah, well, Georgia. We're going to talk more about Georgia.
Yeah.
But I mean, some people are saying, you're writing new law. If the Congress didn't want to do this, no, the Congress banned sex discrimination. This is sex discrimination. We're telling you, they apply the law. I mean, sexual harassment wasn't thought of in 1964, and that's been covered under it. So the chief judge, Robert Katzman, who wrote the decision, said sexual orientation discrimination is a subset of sex discrimination because sexual orientation is defined by one's sex in relation to the sex of those to whom one is attracted, making it impossible for an employer to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation without taking sex into account.
Here you go, folks.
That's the money quote. All right, so another judge, though, in dissent said, I'm very reluctant to do this. I don't think gay people should be discriminated against, but he said Congress didn't include this. So question is, what's going to happen when it goes to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, it's scary because right now I think we see the Supreme Court sort of leaning conservatively.
Well, we still have Anthony Kennedy there, but this can't come up that soon, unless he stays for another year.
We'll see.
But then he's going to leave eventually.
Absolutely. And then we have Trump appointing a new person. I mean, it's scary to think that this could go to the Supreme Court because on the one hand, you want resolution, right? You want the highest court in the land to be able to say sex discrimination does include LGBTQ people. If you're discriminating against them in the workplace, there's absolutely no excuse. You're violating the law.
I think Anthony Kennedy might write that decision if he's still there. He has hired clerks for the next term, but you never know. And he's 83 or so.
Oh, gosh,
It's crazy. I don't want to be working when I'm that old. But, although Dianne Feinstein wants to. We'll talk about her later.
Oh, let's please get to her. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the big case, and that's a big win. And I think if Kennedy hangs in there on the Supreme Court, we could win it. Because now there's a dispute between the circuits, and that's usually when the Supreme Court gets in, but they don't have to.
Yeah. I could see them putting this off for a bit. It's a little scary. It's a little scary to not know.
And also, to remind you about the 2018 elections again, if the Democrats take back the Senate, they can stop these egregious Trump appointees from winning, being confirmed for nomination to the federal bench. And he's appointed a lot of horror shows, as you know. It can be stopped, right?
We have seen Democrats cave for the sake of expediency, though. I think they've...
Some, but
there have been some moments where...
most of the votes on the worst ones have been party line votes.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if we get them, it's going to be tough to get a majority in the Senate, and that's what you need now, a majority. You can't stop it with 40 votes on these nominees. So, vote.
Please, please, please do.
And people are.
Yeah.
I mean, we should just say it. I mean, in Texas, the conservatives are apparently terrified because early voting in the primaries is overwhelmingly Democrat, or increasing their numbers over the Republicans. It's so, and there were 2 special elections this week in, where was it? In New Hampshire and in. What was another one?
There was a woman in New Hampshire. Oh, man, it's been hard to keep track. There's so many Democratic successes at the local level, which is good. But
they're winning back legislative seats. And, well, we had a big hole to dig out of, didn't we? In the last 10 years, Democrats lost 1,000 legislative seats in this country. And, because the right wing is pretty determined to keep us out of the state houses.
Absolutely.
So, anyway.
I mean, we see this push and pull whenever the party in power isn't quite meeting expectations, if you will. It's safe to say that Trump has certainly undershot in terms of meeting many expectations and campaign promises, but I don't know, we'll see. I'm very interested in the House races. In particular, I've been keeping my eye on Arizona, where Joe Arpaio is going to be running again.
For Senate.
For Senate. But we also saw so many local voters, particularly Latino voters, mobilized in Arizona. So I'm interested in seeing how the Senate and House races go. In these states moving forward, not just in 2018, 2020, because we saw so much turnout during the last presidential election, and it's so tough to get people to show up in the midterms, right? It seems like there's less at stake.
But I don't think it's going to be hard this year, right?
Please, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong and get out there. I'd love to see it.
Raise your hand and promise I will vote in 2018 in the primaries. I will vote in 2018 in the general elections. I promise. You promise now? Thank you. I think people are doing, because we live through this crap every day with Trump and with and all the Republicans, and it hurts. It almost physically hurts.
Absolutely.
And I think that's certainly going to be a motivator to get out in the polls and stop this. I know some of you still support him and will vote. All right, but you are a minority.
It's very true.
And I guess since we're talking about politics, what about Dianne Feinstein? She was denied the Democratic endorsement for re-election. They didn't end up endorsing anybody. Nobody got 60%. But it's not the first time it's happened to her, because she is a very center-right Democrat. So it's likely that she'll be in a runoff with a Democrat in the fall over there. Yeah. The Republican Party apparently is disappearing out there.
I mean, you would think so. And it's interesting because Feinstein originally ran during a time when they needed to have a sort of centrist, middle-of-the-road Democrat to really fight the conservative wave in California, which is virtually non-existent today. So
I know.
She's a dying breed of Democrat, certainly.
Yeah. She's had to be pulled on so many issues. People say she's good on gun control and perhaps on immigration.
Sure.
But, on our issues, I mean, when she was mayor of San Francisco, she vetoed the domestic partners bill that was passed by the city council, by this board of supervisors. I mean, wow. So and she was very slow to come along on same-sex marriage. She's not a leader, and she's 85 years old. I'm not supposed to make any ageist remarks, but I'm 64 and I'm slowing down. And I hope that Justice Kennedy doesn't. So anyway, should we talk about guns?
Absolutely, and let's talk about new voters for the midterm elections. There are a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds that will be able to vote. Among them are many of these students from Parkland who have actually been speaking out after the shooting that happened in Parkland, Florida, at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. Marjory Stoneman Douglas is actually near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Florida. We used to compete against them in speech and debate, my high school, all the time. They were great competitors, great school, great kids.
Did they beat you or did you beat them?
It depended on what season and what time of year and what event, but they were a fierce competition, I'll tell you that. They were really, really great.
You can tell.
You can tell.
And what was your school?
My school is Trinity Prep in Central Florida. Okay. It was a little private Episcopalian school.
You're going to start hearing from people now.
Oh gosh, man! Please, send me your stories. If you went to Trinity Prep, and want to talk to me about your time there in Central Florida, please do. Yeah, I went to high school there. But yeah, I've been encouraged to see students from Stoneman Douglas coming out and speaking out. Among them, Emma Gonzalez, particularly because we've seen time and time again. These school shootings happen, right? The weapon of choice in so many of these school shootings is the semi-automatic AR-15, often with attachments to make the weapon automatic.
Insane.
Absolutely. And so I kept asking myself time and time again, if young students being attacked, if queer people in a safe space at a bar being attacked isn't enough, what is? And I think finally we're seeing these outspoken high schoolers touching on one tactic in particular that has worked, which is meeting these gun rights advocates where they tend to make their attacks online, making these extremist statements. These kids went right into Twitter to start fighting with the NRA.
That's a picture of David Hogg. Did we already do? That's a picture of David Hogg. He's another one. I want to get back to Emma. Do you have Emma's picture there?
We did. I think we just showed it. Yeah.
But now the other news about her is that she is bisexual openly.
Yes.
And she's the president of the Gay Straight Alliance in the school. I hadn't known that before this week. And people are calling her our Joan of Arc. But David Hogg, the other student, he was on Joy Reid, and she said, well, you know, what's your response to those who are claiming you're a tool of celebrities and George Soros? And he said, I'm sorry for them. They've lost faith in America, and we haven't. And we're never going to. He looks right in the camera, put his picture up there again, and he says, David Hogg, can you do that? Yeah. He said, you might as well stop now because we're going to outlive you. It was really powerful. I mean, it's such poise.
Absolutely.
They're not into being spokespersons. They're just speaking from the heart and directly, and they have no agenda other than getting this done.
Absolutely.
They're not running for office.
Right.
Politicians look so terrible in comparison to them, but wow.
It's been very powerful. Emma had a great quote the other day, I think it was a few days after the shooting, where a host on CNN asked her, you know, what would you say to the NRA? And she told them, disband, disarm, and never come back to my hometown. And I've never seen more poise or confidence or absolute assuredness coming from a high schooler, you know, in a time of such grief.
Well, the Democrats got really mealy-mouthed about this for many years because they said we can't win this issue, and we're going to get slaughtered. So just forget it. We're not going to talk about it. And now they are. And by the way, Emma now has over 750,000 Twitter followers.
Yes, sir.
David has a lot too, but that is more than the NRA has. They only have about 560. And she is, by the way, hashtag Emma4, the number 4 change. If you want to get on her list. Now, our my usual co-host here, Ann Northrup, said, you know, was raising the issue, why all this tension to this, and where was the attention to Black Lives Matter?
Sure, absolutely.
Do you have a take on that?
Yeah, well, actually, Lincoln Anthony Blades over at Teen Vogue wrote a really great piece, an op-ed, where he sort of cited a lot of leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of talked about the disparities between both movements, but also some of the similarities and comparisons that could be made. What seemed most salient to me and interesting about this argument that we haven't quite supported students of color is that after the death of Trayvon Martin, a high school student in Florida, who at the time was shot walking back home, there was a group of activists that were involved with Black Lives Matter called the Dream Defenders. And those were students in Florida who were actually fighting for, among a variety of issues, gun control and a change to the Stand Your Ground Act that at the time in Florida meant that you could ostensibly shoot anybody who stepped on your property if you perceived they posed a threat to you.
Yes. You know, somewhat different. I think mostly Black Lives Matter is about police violence.
Sure.
And of course, those stand your ground laws. And yes, the society is almost irredeemably racist, although we're working on it. And we certainly were out there in the streets around the Black Lives Matter protests and movements and things. Obviously, Colin Kaepernick didn't get enough support, and he's gone from the NFL.
Right.
So all this to be turned over in our hearts. And also wanted us to bring, and I did see some of it this week, Anna Deavere Smith did a special on HBO based on her show Notes from the Field, where she portrays, it's about the school to prison pipeline, and she portrays everybody connected with the schools around these issues, and then she also portrays John Lewis, the congressman, and the late, why am I blocking his name? James Baldwin. Yes, and it's so moving. So Notes from the Field on HBO, if you want to get into the hearts and minds of these kids, young people especially, and others. So, all right. And also on guns, what's going on in Georgia?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that.
Well, first of all, they want, you know, Delta has been among the many corporations that have said we're severing our relationships with the NRA, or no more discounts, no this, that. So
the lieutenant governor of Georgia, I think, tweeted the other day that Delta would no longer receive tax breaks from the government, I think, if they pulled their partnership with the NRA. I think Delta offered some travel discounts.
There's a huge tax bill on the table, and it was sailing through, and this guy says we're going to stop it.
Right.
So they're playing hardball too, as they do. And there are all these cities and states saying, Delta, come to us. Now, Delta's the largest private employer in Georgia. It was founded there.
Absolutely.
So this is going to be quite a fight, and they're not going to go away without a fight. I can't, but the guy proposing it wants to replace Governor Nathan Deal, who is a more moderate Republican, who has tried to stop on this. So I was very encouraged. Are you sitting down? The Reverend Pat Robertson on the 700 Club.
Oh, wow.
I flip channels and I check in on what they're doing sometime. There he is, and he leaned into the camera and said, "I'm a hunter, but I keep the picture up." He said, "I think it's time to ban assault weapons." I almost fell out. He ought to want to ban assault weapons. He looks pretty scared there, doesn't he? And he should be scared, given all the crap that he dishes out all the time. But anyway, I think that's a bit of a turning point.
I mean, they had plenty of folks scared. You're seeing all these companies pulling their partnerships from the NRA. You're seeing Pat Robertson changing a position I'm sure he would have doubled down on just a year ago. And, the thing that impacted me most was watching Marco Rubio debate those kids on TV. And I know we've talked about this a bit, but just seeing the absolute look of fear and the fact that he truly couldn't defend any of his positions without having to admit to the fact that he's getting a lot of money from the NRA, and he's been so duplicitous.
Well, politicians always say, they just support me because I take good positions.
Sure.
But what they know is, and it's not just the money that they give to Marco Rubio. He gets a lot of money, but they spend separately an awful lot of money to defeat your opponent and destroy them. I mean, hundreds of thousands. And where does that money come from? It doesn't come from the members of the NRA, the 5,000 lousy million members of the NRA. It comes from people like David Koch, who's a plutocrat. He says, I'm going to give the NRA the money. And the Russians also had a deal with the with them as well. So, it's... That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of
the money disappearing. I mean, it's follow the money. You know what I mean? Any organization can claim their members support a cause, but when you look at who's keeping it afloat.
But I was very encouraged when the president said this week that if he had been on the scene there, he would have run into the building, even if he was unarmed, into an active shooting scene. And I just want to say, Mr. President, I want to thank you, because there is no one in this country that I can think of that I would rather go into an active shooting scene unarmed than you.
Man, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, the man who was dismissed from military service over bone spurs on several occasions.
It is a complete coward, complete scaredy cat. He's a monster. It was a monstrous thing to say, And then he gave that rambling speech at CPAC, self-pitying, self-aggrandizing, let people shout, lock her up, fake news. And then there's this whole thing about arming schools. And Florida legislature did vote $67 million to arm teachers.
It's ridiculous. The Florida legislature also, just to remind you all, voted that porn was a public health crisis. And then also voted not to look at any gun reform legislation while the students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas were sitting in the state capitol.
Well, they're making some progress.
They finally are. The governor has changed his position on a few things. He says he's pushing to ban bump stocks.
And
he's pushing to raise the age. I think that's throwing a few crumbs when we really have to make some substantial change. It's an issue long overdue.
Just as we did at the beginning of the show, Trump in his speech kept emphasizing the midterm elections because he knows what he's in for. And so if you don't like him, you better vote the other way. And how about the Mexican president canceling a visit with him because he was just, because Trump was screaming at him about you've got to pay for this wall, otherwise I have no credibility. And he just said, screw you.
Yeah.
That was the end of that call. No visit, it's off. All right. Okay, a couple of other Supreme Court things. really dispiriting. 5-3, they ruled that immigration officials can detain immigrants indefinitely.
Yeah.
A lower court in the Ninth Circuit had said, 6 months, and come on, you got to make some sort of a determination here. And the Supreme Court said no, you can just do this indefinitely. What is going on?
Yeah, it's wild. So the decision from the Supreme Court doesn't just impact undocumented immigrants who are disproportionately impacted by ICE arrests and detainments. Detainments under Trump have actually gone up. It also applies to temporary residents, right? So any immigrant that is essentially arrested by ICE and held in detention has lost their right to a timely bond hearing.
You have somebody you want to talk about. We've talked about him before, but update us on the story.
Were you talking
Nunez, detained?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Ivan Nunez. We have
Yes.
to talk about him. So he's a married gay man who was actually going in with his husband for an interview with ICE, a citizenship interview, because they were married. They were entering the process of getting Ivan citizenship. And I think it was late last year, Ivan was arrested. And finally, in January, his husband started kind of creating a movement together, getting a lot of LGBTQ rights and immigrants' rights organizations.
That's Ivan there on the right,
On
yes?
the right, correct. So his husband on the left has been very vocal about the fact that his husband essentially has no rights in detention. And he could be deported to Mexico in spite of the fact that they are married and that they weren't going through the procedure to, quote unquote, do it right. You know what I mean? So many people on the right say, if you're going to be here, do it right. They're absolutely doing it right.
And what they brought up was that he was, the ICE is saying he was technically deported because he showed up at the border and he went away.
Right.
And that's a deportation. I mean, it's not. I mean, but ICE is just being given absolute free rein to do whatever they want. And
it's ridiculous. And I think the Supreme Court decision really exacerbates the impact ICE is having, not just on immigrants overall, but LGBTQ immigrants are subject to so much harassment and abuse in those detention centers.
Yes.
It's really, really terrifying.
Especially transgender people. Yeah. A better Supreme Court, not decision, but we told you about the lesbian mom in Arizona, Kimberly McLaughlin, who was trying to deny shared custody to her ex-wife. I mean, they had the kid together, and she was trying to say, but she's not the mother too. That's not Arizona law, and the Supreme Court rejected hearing her case.
Correct. Yeah.
They gave no reason. The case now goes back to the Pima County court for a custody trial. But it's really dispiriting when people try to twist the law. I mean, the whole point is we want our marriages respected in every way.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that includes in parenthood. And then in Hawaii, an appeals court there rejected a religious justification for a bed and breakfast that refused a room to a lesbian couple. The owner said that gay people defile our land. Well, I don't know if I'd want to stay in a place with somebody like that. But he's represented by Alliance Defending Freedom. The couple was represented by Lambda, and they won at the appeals court in Hawaii. All this is going to be settled by the Supreme Court this year sometime.
Hopefully.
Okay. Any more word on the Olympics? We do have one more Olympics picture at the end there of Gus Kenworthy and Adam Rippon, our poster boys. These were the two big out gays there. They became very close. They were kind of joshing each other towards the end.
Adam Rippon had some choice words for Mike Pence, which I enjoyed. I know we've talked about that, but I love bringing it up.
Yes.
I just love how he took him out on Twitter.
But then in terms of the end of the Olympics, Gus tweeted that he was so proud of everyone who worked so hard to get to the Olympics. Well, everyone except Ivanka. Honestly, WTF is she doing here? Eric Trump said that he thought that was disgusting, and his sister is a role model for what? International crime? I mean, ooh.
I would love for us to decide what her official position is right now, because I feel like she throws on the daughter hat when it's convenient, and then the public official hat.
Now, I think we buried the headline this week.
Yeah.
Did you hear the president's press conference on Friday? He was with some foreign leader. The Prime Minister of Australia.
Oh, yeah. Well, at least he didn't. Oh, no, it wasn't Trump that mispronounced his name. It was our former press secretary. Well, I won't get into that. Called him Trumbull, Malcolm Trumbull.
Whatever. So Trump at that point says that, yeah, I'm doing heavier sanctions on Korea.
Sure.
But if it doesn't work, I'm going to move to phase 2, and it will be very, very unfortunate for the world. Now, that means he's ready to pull the trigger.
Sure.
I did talk to Ms. Northrup about this. She said he's not going to do it.
I'm on Ann's team. I'm Team Ann on this
He's
one.
not going to do it.
I don't think he's going to do it. He's just a bloviating sack of extreme words. You know?
He's done everything else he said he was going to do.
He's done almost everything else he said he was going to do.
Believe people when they tell you what they're going to do. I mean, you drop a bomb on that peninsula.
Sure.
The fallout goes to China.
Absolutely.
And to Eastern Russia. It's World War III.
Sure.
You know, the people hurt the most are in South Korea and in Japan.
Yeah.
And North Korea might fire off to them. Guam might get hit here in our territory. But, well, we could get hit here too. Oh, my God. I mean, you know, North Korea is a problem. I mean, you know.
Absolutely a problem, but I don't know if you want to match. Yeah, sure, but so are we sometimes. So
yes.
we're also.
I wasn't. You know, North Korea is a very repressed society.
Absolutely.
We're working on it though. Here.
Slowly but surely, unless Trump keeps rewriting our guidelines for human rights assistant abroad, coming from the Department of State.
Now, last week when we did the show, we said, where are the new guidelines on transgender that was supposed to come from the administrations? And they won't show us what they did.
But they have told us that there are transgender people newly enlisting. So we have our first new recruits of the year enlisting in the U.S. military. But
you know, apparently there are reports that Secretary of Defense Mattis is going to advise that transgender people remain in the military. Department of Justice told a judge that they'd have such a new policy that they won't need to hand over documents about its origins. And I'm reading something that they may try to use a new policy of forcing out 286,000 people that have been non-deployable for a year in order to get at transgender people. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen here. A new poll says 58% of people say that trans people should be able to serve. That's a Reuters poll. And anyway.
We got a lot of bunk excuses from the administration as well, that the supposed cost of transitioning, the medical costs were burdensome. You know, when you crunch the numbers, so many people wrote in response to that it simply wasn't the case.
Now, this State Department thing, though, is we should all be alarmed about this.
Yeah, this is very troubling. So State Department officials have actually been ordered to pare back language in a soon-to-be-released annual report that traditionally used to discuss women's reproductive rights, discrimination that affected marginalized communities, specifically LGBTQ people around the globe, and those that are living with HIV/AIDS around the globe that our country has traditionally provided some sort of assistance for.
Well, I mean, it's just a general report on the state of human rights in the world. And it was used by people here to say, I'm seeking asylum. You wrote the report. It's terrible back there. But the thing is, he doesn't want to give people asylum. He doesn't want to let anybody in, except from Norway.
Wonder why that is.
Oh, it's not an S-hole country.
I know, right?
And nobody from Norway wants to come here.
I wouldn't.
I just talked to a friend this week, and he lives in England and Ireland. He said, I'm not visiting until this is over here. So, yeah, this is really outrageous. This, you know, puts the United States into the position of not being a supporter of human rights around the world, which we're not. Other than, the only thing we seem to stand up for sometimes is religious freedom for Christians in the Middle East.
But, you know, this comes on the heels also of Trump promising to pull back money from programs that fund LGBTQ rights abroad, access to contraceptive health care for women abroad, HIV/AIDS funding in a variety of countries in Africa and Asia. You know, and it all kind of falls into this idea of putting America first, right? That we simply couldn't afford to help those people abroad. And I feel like this is just another step of trying to minimize the risk that these people face abroad and the role that the U.S. has traditionally played in kind of helping them gain access to medicine and support.
Well, I also think it was disgraceful that the Congress and the president had Billy Graham's body lying in state in our U.S. Capitol. A bigoted religious leader. A religious leader at all, in terms of honoring a religious leader in this way. It's the first time they put a religious figure in there, but he had a terrible record on gay stuff. I mean, some people could argue on race. I mean, he integrated his crusades in the early 50s. He did. Because he wanted to get people into his particular form of religion. Yeah. But the worst thing I learned about him this week, as people were writing about him, is during the Vietnam War. Yeah. He was urging Nixon to go out in a ball of fire, it's very Trumpian kind of talk, and really and kill 1 million people. Right. And even Nixon, who was a horrible human being, said, "Oh, that's a little much. I don't think I want to go that far." I mean, we did enough damage in Vietnam, but wow.
Yeah, it's been wild seeing presidents from both the right and the left praising Billy Graham. I think it speaks to the impact that the religious right has on politics in this country and the way they've sort of embedded themselves in federal politics. I mean, it was wild to see just Barack Obama's tweet in support of and honoring Billy Graham, right? Certainly we know he wasn't always the most progressive on LGBTQ issues, but to see the most recent Democratic president just sort of erase that history is wild, yeah.
The statistic I read about Billy, which is impressive, is that he spoke face to face with more human beings than anyone in history, because he was all over the world in stadiums, doing these crusades, and there he was.
Man,
all right,
that's tragic.
Okay, in Arkansas, that judge we told you about, who for 7 years took sexual pictures of young men in exchange for lighter sentences.
Jesus.
Wow. Joseph Beckman, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and bribery. He also obstructed justice during the investigation. Apparently, he did something like this when he was a prosecutor 20 years ago, and he avoided prosecution by resigning as a prosecutor.
Jesus Christ.
And then he got elected as a judge in Arkansas. Now, I have people in Arkansas, and a lot of good people there, but you're not paying attention if you're electing someone like that.
Yeah. And those are other elections that go under the radar. It's really scary. People don't pay attention, and then folks like that end up sitting in office.
Some other state things, maybe, things that are going on. How about New Hampshire? The House Judiciary Committee advanced a transgender non-discrimination bill. It goes to the full House. It was endorsed by the Republican governor. They're starting to read the tea leaves. We did talk about Dianne Feinstein. By the way, the other Democrat running against her is Senate Leader Kevin DeLeon. Do you know much about him?
Not a lot.
I can't say. Our California viewers will fill us in about that. The primary is in June, but no Republican has cracked 10% in the polls this year.
Anywhere in California? For this Senate race.
This Senate race.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe it. It's amazing what a few decades can do. And, perhaps it might be worth revisiting Georgia and that bill that's headed toward the House that would essentially allow any private organization that provides adoption services to deny LGBTQ couples the right to adopt a child.
What's going to happen?
I mean, I have no idea. It could hit the House, and depending on what happens in the House, it could become law. What's interesting is, different human rights groups and LGBTQ advocacy organizations have come out against it. The Human Rights Campaign raised particular concerns.
Well, there's going to be. We're taping on February 28th, and there's a big rally planned against this on March the 1st. I don't imagine the governor wants it, but I don't know if they're going to get enough votes to override him on it. Or
I mean, we've seen a lot of businesses threatening to pull their companies or their movie shoots or television shoots outside of Georgia. We know Georgia is a big place for a lot of TV shows to shoot. So it's very interesting to see if that might have the same impact it did during the trans bathroom law bill that really helped change a tide there.
And again, under their law, and I don't think it's right, but strictly religious organizations do have a right to discriminate, which is wrong. If you're getting any kind of government money, you should not be able to discriminate. But as we know, we told you last week, there's a big lawsuit against HHS, and the Catholic bishops have an outlet that is discriminating against gay people who want to take in refugees.
Sure, yeah. That was a case in Texas, with the lesbian couple. So it's really troubling to see this issue keep cropping up at the state level. Again, it would be really great to have some sort of closure at the federal level on issues like this. I just hope it doesn't.
It's never over, Gabe. It is never over.
Is never over.
Mike Signorilli calls this victory blindness on our part. we won marriage, it's over, we won. What can we do now?
Yeah.
Well, you've got to work like hell to hold on to it.
Absolutely. I mean, when Republicans are still trying to overturn Roe v. Wade decades later, it is proof that nothing is ever over if people want to keep re-legislating it, in public, on the news. At every moment. So.
But I don't think that the City Council of Starkville, Mississippi is going to get away with banning a gay pride, not banning a gay pride, but they wouldn't approve it. I mean, that's not how the permitting process normally works in most places. Sure. The police department has guidelines, they issue the permits. And but in this case, the council voted it down narrowly.
Starkville has an alderman's council. And so it's interesting because the mayor of Starkville actually supports this parade, is fully in support of it. I'm pretty sure she's a bit right-wing leaning, but she's fully in support of this parade. And a college student has actually filed suit because the alderman's council voted, I think, 5-4.
We have a picture of the woman from Starkville Pride. Her name is Bailey McDaniel. She's down there in little Starkville, Mississippi. And she says, I like to believe that this type of hateful, intolerant behavior does not represent the Starkville community. And I think that's probably true. And so Robbie Kaplan, the big lawyer who argued the Windsor case at the United States Supreme Court, represented Edie Windsor. She is down there. This is her 4th case in Mississippi.
God bless her. Yeah, she's really...
Well, that's her thing now. Mississippi.
It's great. We need warriors like that in these small towns. But, and there's so many people my age, I think, who have grown up taking pride parades for granted and events like this. I know for a lot of young folks, this doesn't seem like a big issue. And I've, in conversation, I've had friends tell me, well, what's the big deal with the pride parade? They can always go to another city. It's a small town. There's so many more pressing things happening in the world. I'm thinking of the 13, 14-year-old kid who's like me in the closet in a town like Starkville, who doesn't have any visibility, never sees positive representations of queer folks. So, I'm all for this, and I think that we still need to keep pushing at these local levels. Even small gestures like this, something as small as a pride parade can make a huge difference.
You don't have to go all the way to Starkville. We could go to Staten Island.
Yeah, we've got a great one here too. Yeah, that's true.
The prides, the Staten Island is like, it seems to be the holdout St. Patrick's Day parade. We're allowed in the Fifth Avenue parade for the last year. Even Cardinal Dolan acceded to that. We're allowed, and we have and this weekend we will have the St. Pat's for All, which has been going on for 20 years. But on Staten Island, the Pride Center of Staten Island and Lavender and Green Alliance went to the church where they sign up groups. And this is not a strictly religious parade that they want to say they are. And the president of the group said, you're not compatible with the Catholic Church and its tenets, now get out. So, it's this is still a fight out on Staten Island, which did vote for Trump. It was the only borough of New York that voted for Trump.
That is true.
Hillary got 79% of the vote in New York City and 90% in Manhattan, but Staten Island went for her.
There are little holdouts.
They're making a little progress on the Pulse Memorial in Orlando, but it's only going to be they're now building a temporary memorial. I mean, there's sort of a makeshift memorial that's been there. I was there. But then eventually they're going to build some big thing. They're going to keep that sign.
Well, it sounds like the owner, is very close to the space. She says she opened up the bar to honor her gay brother who passed away in the 80s. So, it's interesting because I think the owner has really struggled with what to do in terms of creating something respectful in light of what happened there, but also holding onto the space and keeping it within the community. I know when I went back the October after the Pulse shooting happened, Orlando had to push back its pride. I went to go cover it. It was great. First time I was back in my hometown in 8 years. A town that was fully changed. I had considered it a really homophobic place growing up. And, to go back for the first time in 7, 8 years and just see the downtown area covered in rainbow flags and supportive people, it was a great impact. But I think, even then there was a lot of question about what was going to happen with the bar. Would it reopen as a new bar? Would it reopen as a memorial? Do you tear the old bar down and build something from scratch? So I know this conversation is still ongoing, and so many people in the community have very strong feelings about what to do with that space and what is appropriate.
Where does Gabe Gonzalez come down on this?
Oh, gosh. I think it's up to the community and the owner of that space. I think we need to have a conversation, particularly with the folks that were impacted by that tragedy. A lot of the Pulse survivors came out against Telemundo, I think it was. It was a Spanish language channel that did a reenactment of the shooting. And in that instance, you have all these survivors coming out to speak out and say, this is in poor taste. I'm still suffering from PTSD after the shooting. I think we need to treat the actual space with a higher level of respect and truly keep the conversation going. Make sure that every voice that is relevant is heard.
Well, Paul Rudnick, the gay playwright, you know, who wrote Jeffrey, which is very successful, he has actually written a comedy that references it.
Oh, wow.
It was in Los Angeles, but I mean, I guess he's reworking it. Didn't get good reviews out there. It's called Big Night. It's really about people at the Oscars, but then it's in the midst of the aftermath of mass killings like Las Vegas, Orlando, and elsewhere. And what do we do with this madness? So I don't know. Paul is a very good playwright. Let's see if he can make something out of this. He's great. I want to hear about what's going on in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's move on to there. There's a story about gun violence in Las Vegas I did want to get to.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, speaking about gun violence in Las Vegas, there's a very underreported story that I do think we should get to.
Yes.
As you all know, Puerto Rico is near and dear to my heart. I'm from there. We will get to it before the show is over. But over the weekend, on Friday night, and this is a vastly underreported story that's coming to us from Eli Ehrlich over at Into, which is a new publication from Grindr. There's a bar in Las Vegas called the Las Vegas Lounge, which a lot of people are reporting is Las Vegas's only trans bar. We can say with some certainty that it is a very openly and visibly trans bar. If you look at the exterior of the bar, there's a silhouette of a woman, the colors of the trans flag. That bar was the target of gun violence on Friday night. Only 2 local outlets in Las Vegas reported on it, didn't even mention that it was a trans bar. The shooter is still unidentified, has not been caught, and 2 people were injured. One individual that was shot during the incident said that the pain is beyond excruciating and that it is a reminder, unfortunately, that trans people are not welcome here.
This was a black trans woman named Callie Luby Hayward, who said that she has a shattered bones and a broken leg, and it has received almost no coverage down there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, other than, you know, brief mention on the news because not valuing the people who were harmed.
Well, sure, absolutely. You know what I mean? When you're discussing gun violence, I think it's easier to cast young children and moms in a positive light. But when queer people are targeted, you know, we had to fight to get people to pay attention to Pulse. It was wild.
Pulse. I remember the initial reports about Pulse. They had trouble spitting the gay word out, and not even necessarily Latinx. You know?
Acknowledging that it was a Latino night at a gay bar. Yeah, It's a real tragedy. Well, also, speaking of that, Latinx issues, I would like to talk a little bit about how Puerto Ricans are recovering in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. I just learned today that the federal government has actually cut the hurricane relief grant that they were giving to Puerto Rico in half, so 4-point-something billion down to about 2-point-something billion. So far, there's been no explanation for this cut. And Puerto Ricans have kept seeing this time and time again from the federal government, from FEMA, from independent contractors that have gotten federal money to show up there. The job still isn't done. I have an aunt and uncle that live right outside the metropolitan area in the capital. They just got electricity back about a week ago.
And how long has it been?
It's been since September. The hurricane hit the island on September 20th. And it's been months and months. We've seen schools closing. And, you know, I've read a couple of interesting pieces that are focusing on the impact this is having on LGBTQ individuals. I know the LGBT Center of Puerto Rico actually reached out to help HIV/AIDS patients as far back as October who are having trouble accessing meals, accessing medication, and access to anything that they sort of need to live day to day.
What about all those paper towels that President Trump tossed them?
You know, I'm sure those are really useful. I've heard a lot of people have been wiping with them and drying things.
Well, of course, he also said, "We'll never forget you," but he said that to people in Houston who were hit by the hurricane, another hurricane, not to the people of Puerto Rico. Didn't say, "We'll never forget you."
And, you know, if you look at exactly what he said, at the time you went to Florida.
Even if it was somewhere else in the world, why wouldn't we be helping?
Oh, sure. But he also went to Texas and Florida and said there was no cost to the recovery, right? That the federal government would put no price tag on whatever it took to help Americans recuperate. But when it comes to Americans that are living on what is essentially a current day colony, there's less accountability there and there's less care for, you know, the brown folks that don't speak English on an island.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm sure it's also tough. I've spoken to a lot of people firsthand, my own friends, that, you know, are saying that nightlife is sort of coming back, right? Because so many queer people, particularly in Puerto Rico, might find community not necessarily in their town or their neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
They go to a gay bar, they go to the downtown area, they'll find a space, and you know, when there are streetlights that still aren't operating correctly, and you can barely have access to the medicine you need day to day, you know, whether or not people are still going out to these bars, whether or not tourists and locals are still using them, they're open, and Puerto Rico is certainly asking people to come back, but it's been tough.
Is there a political position that you advocate in terms of the status of Puerto Rico that you think could help turn this around?
Man, it's really tough because I don't think there is a great solution right now. You know, I think we have to look at history and acknowledge the fact that Puerto Rico has always been treated by a colony, or as a colony by the United States. You know, the only reason they threw Puerto Ricans citizenship is because they wanted them to fight in a few world wars. Puerto Ricans had to show up at Congress. There were violent incidents with independence movements from Puerto Rico showing up to the U.S. to simply demand that Puerto Rico get their own local legislature and their own government. Right. And they've been fighting this 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you know what I mean? And by the time the 60s came around, they had their own local government and some sense of autonomy. But Puerto Ricans pay almost every federal income or federal tax except federal income tax, and they still can't vote for president. They can vote in primaries and things like that, right? So we're seeing a lot of people moving to the United States, the contiguous United States, Florida, New York.
And politically, it's not all that liberal. I mean, they have a sort of, don't they have a Republican governor?
Sure, yeah. So they're pro-statehood party. They're two primary parties. Don't necessarily fall cleanly along Democratic and Republican lines, but Ricardo Rosselló is their current governor, and he's part of the island's pro-statehood party, which tends to side with Republicans. But what is interesting is that lately, the pro-statehood party in Puerto Rico's legislature has actually voted or has voted to try to reinstitute LGBTQ discriminations that the governor has fought against.
Yeah. We've only got 7 minutes left, but you have a website that people can go to learn more about this.
Yes, absolutely, I do.
Please give that,
it should
and then
come
we're
up on
going
the
to whip through
screen
some
here.
other stories.
It should be Centro LGBTPR.org. That's Puerto Rico's LGBT center. So if you want any more information on how the aftermath of Hurricane Maria is impacting Puerto Rico's LGBTQ community, please give that website a visit and get in touch with us if you have any more questions. I'd be happy to reach out with more resources. So
whipping through some other stories since we're down to our last 7 minutes, we have talked the night away.
We have, really.
We have, but it's good. California is moving to classify conversion therapy as fraud. So not just banning it for minors, but saying you can sue if you're subjected to this.
It's long overdue.
In New Jersey, the Senate passed 2 pro-trans bills. It's going to be easier to update your gender marker on your birth certificate and on your death certificate to reflect your gender identity. In Cleveland, this is a terrible story, a trans woman, Felicia Mitchell, we have her picture, 45 years old, shot and killed outside her apartment. Her partner, Shane Mitchell, believes it was drug-related, but the police have not assigned a motive to that case. And in Texas, the trans boy, Mac Beggs, who's 18, we told you about him, the wrestler, he once again won the Texas Girls Class 110-pound division. He was undefeated this season. He wants to wrestle with the boys, but the state won't let him. So he has a 56-0 record with girls. By the way, this week the Supreme Court also heard this case about unions and about checkoffs and about which would destroy the labor movement, and that's likely to happen, folks. And believe me, when we don't have the protection and support of the labor movement, who are our biggest supporters in terms of money, we are in big trouble, and labor is in big trouble. But that's the kind of government we have.
Some scary stuff out there. It's funny, I mentioned earlier, I've been seeing so many newsrooms and young organizations unionizing, as at the federal level, we're seeing all of these abilities to collectively bargain slowly being stripped away.
Good news from Puerto Rico.
Yes, right?
There was a license to discriminate bill down there, and it was passed. It was passed, but the governor vetoed it, and they couldn't override his veto. In Manassas Park, Virginia, the school board added sexual orientation and gender identity to the non-discrimination policy, and that was spoken up for by Donica Rome, who was the new House of Delegates out transgender. Anchorage, Alaska is about to vote on by mail on a measure to remove protections for trans people. This would allow any individual to come up to you and say, I want to see your birth certificate if you're in this restroom.
Which is wild.
I don't carry my birth certificate with me.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure that they even talked to the chief of police in Anchorage, it was.
He ain't for it.
Who supposedly laughed and said it'd be impossible to enforce, so good luck with that.
A couple of international news notes.
Sure.
In Nepal, they have a new code that removes the ban on unnatural sexual intercourse, and instead it bans unnatural sexual intercourse with another person without his or her consent. Well, nobody should have non-consensual sex.
Absolutely.
I don't think. In Northern Ireland, there's a gay couple suing to get married. Maybe the Parliament in the United Kingdom will resolve this. We don't know, but they're suing. The new Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, Michael McCormick, he's a former editor and he was a right-winger, and he once wrote, unfortunately, gays are here, and if the disease their unnatural acts helped spread doesn't wipe out humanity, they're here to stay. So he says, I apologize for this repeatedly. Why can't I be Deputy Prime Minister? It was pretty extreme. El Salvador's main right-wing party wants to ban same-sex marriage in the Constitution. Anything else in Latinx America that you want to talk about?
Well, I think it goes back to the immigration issue. El Salvador's in the Northern Triangle. It's one of the most violent areas in Central America. And, Amnesty actually released a report on this a few months ago, which I wrote about some time ago, about how trans and other LGBTQ individuals in those countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, that northwestern part of Central America, are actually at risk for a disproportionate amount of discrimination and violence.
Yes.
And even when they try to flee to Mexico or the United States, they'll often face similar violence because they don't have any agency, right? And we're seeing ICE given even more of an ability to detain these people and deny them their rights. The rights to, talk about bond in court, to get released in a timely fashion, to confront the charges against them. It's really troubling. So hearing about stories like this, that these countries are becoming even more hostile toward the rights and needs of LGBTQ people, is really, really troublesome.
Man, it's harder to get out.
Yeah.
In Kenya, though, the High Court there is going to hear a case that could overturn the ban on same-sex marriage. And in Bermuda, the challenge to the repeal of same-sex marriage is going to be heard on May 21st. And, okay, in AIDS news, South Korea, the health ministry has approved PrEP, but it costs too much and most people can't get it, so that's no good. A couple of entertainment notes. By the way, Jerry Springer, the opera, which Ann and I saw, is extending to May 1st, and Matt McGrath is going to step in for Terrence Mann as Jerry. Matt McGrath's a Tony Award-winning actor. I had never been to Broadway by the year. They pick 2 years and they do the songs from that year. Broadway stars come out and sing them. And this is a wonderful show. They do it at Town Hall. I saw 1930 and 1964. So a lot of Cole Porter, a lot of the Gershwin brothers, and in '64 you had Hello Dolly and Shorty Girl. I had a wonderful time at that. I'm sorry I never went before. And I went to the Morgan Library.
Oh, no way.
It is gay, gay, gay. Tennessee Williams exhibit and a Peter Hujar exhibit. Peter Hujar was a big gay photographer. He was the partner of David Wojnarowicz, if you remember. And so there it is. 2 big rooms full of gay stuff at Mr. Morgan's library. Check that out. What else? We're down to our last minute. I don't have anything else. I just recommend going to the next edition of Broadway by the Year, which is on March 26th. And I would recommend that Anna Devere Smith HBO special, if you want to check that out. Notes from the Field. Anything else from you, Gabe?
Man, I am devoid of any cultural insight at present. I'm just waiting for season 10 of RuPaul's Drag Race. That's about all I have on my schedule right now. Season 10, sir. We're about to finish season 3 of All Stars. Enter season 10. There are a bunch of New York queens in it this season that I'm rooting for personally. I won't say who.
And where can we see you?
Where can you find me? So tonight, Wednesday night.
Well, that's too late for that.
I know, it's too late for that, but I will be performing comedy set at Club Cumming. Lately, you can see me all around town. I've been writing and working with a few series, so yeah, check it out.
And I'll be sure to.
Do I have a website? Oh gosh, no. I do have a Twitter account though. If you want to find me, it's at Gaybones, Gaybonez. I'll send out more information on the newsletter about upcoming shows or anything I think that might be interesting for you all.
Thank you very much, Gabe. Good to be with you.
Thanks for having me.
And we will see you next week if they haven't started dropping the bombs.
Oh gosh, let's hope not.